importance of folate or folic acid as a nutrition supplement in our daily diets. But before I do that, I want to introduce myself a little more about my journey in science, and how I landed in this position and rationale for my research. We live in Charlotte. My husband is a dental provider, and we are raising a smart young boy for the last 11 years. I did my education from India, a land of Rama and Gandhi. After graduation only, I decided to enter into a field of research. In my master's, I actually worked on additive effect of alcohol and Ajinomoto. Ajinomoto, you know, everybody, that is added into Chinese food. But what are the bad effects of alcohol if you consume with the Chinese food? How it promotes oxidative stress in our body. During my PhD, I was working on colon cancer prevention using supplements like zinc supplements and wheatgrass. So you see that relationship between me and nutrition is not relatively new. In 2016, I traveled across the world and moved to Denver and joined University of Colorado, Denver as a postdoc. There, I was working in preclinical models, in like mouse models, on head and neck cancer patients. I was trying to figure out how to radiosensitize otherwise resistant tumors. In 2017, I moved to North Carolina and joined Dr. Sergey Karpanko's lab. Since then, under supervision of my great mentor, Dr. Sergey, we are trying to figure out how to control diseases like cancer, how to fight cancer and other metabolic diseases by controlling diet and nutrient supplements, especially folate. We have several animal models in our lab, which are basically folate metabolizing gene knockout models. Sounds super fancy, huh? Anyways, focus of my today's talk is going to be folate, that how folate is beneficial in human diseases. So what are burning human diseases are like cancer, hypertension, diabetes, Alzheimer's, brain health. So when I started prepping this talk, I did not know myself that folate has so many benefits. So I hope that today's talk is going to be equally enlightening for you as it was for me. So what is folate? Let's talk about folate for a moment and how it came into picture. Millions of women take folic acid for healthier pregnancy, thanks to Mrs. Lucy Wills. Lucy Wills, she was a physician. She reported macrocytic anemia, again, in pregnant women in Bombay, a part of India. And she saw that with yeast extract, she could actually get rid of this nutritional deficiency. So it came into picture. Much later, many groups, they identified this active nutrient as folic acid or folate. Later, this folate was also known as vitamin B9 or folacin. So it has many names: folate, folic acid, vitamin B9, folacin. In absence of fancy technologies, scientists used activated charcoal to absorb and concentrate this folic acid. Later in 1948, a group actually elucidated a fancy chemical structure of this folic acid. It made up of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen atoms. So you see, the superpower vitamin is not new. It has been around us for years. Okay, so folic acid. Folic acid is a B vitamin. Folate or folic acid, what do we call it? This term I'm going to use during my talk interchangeably, even though they are different. Folate is actually a general term that is used for several vitamin B9. Type of folates can be, let me throw some scientific terms at you, like folic acid, dihydrofolate, tetrahydrofolate, 5,10-methylene tetrahydrofolate, and so on. Whereas the folic acid is a synthetic form of folate. It is more readily used in the body. So something that's not naturally occurring, but it's actually supplemented. It is used as a supplement or in fortified foods like rice, pasta, bread, cereals. So these foods are actually labeled as enriched. So next time when you go to the market and see the bread labeled as enriched, you know what does it mean. food fortification is actually a way of adding vitamins and minerals, or both the things, to the foods. And this is actually an effort by W Health Organization to reduce birth defects due to deficiencies. What kind of deficiencies? Folic acid, actually, I'm going to come to that too. Folic acid has many benefits, not one or two, but several of them. And I'll be talking about some of them in detail today during my talk. For example, it helps in healthy pregnancy. It maintains your heart function. Folate benefits in cancer, diabetes, brain health. Additionally, I'll also be talking about side effects of folate, about side effects of overconsumption of folate, because each individual is different. The way every individual is metabolizing folate in the body is different as well. Towards the end, I will also be briefly touching about the genetic effects involved and deciding how much folate we shall be consuming. But before I do that, I want to show you some natural sources of folate in our daily grocery list. So good sources of folate, natural folate present in our grocery list can be legumes, beans, peas, green leafy vegetables, kale, spinach, broccoli, or fortified foods or supplements like rice or pasta or bread. The measure of microgram of folate that is used in the body is because body absorb more folic acid from fortified foods and dietary supplements than the bound folate present naturally in the foods. Compared to folate found naturally in the foods, you actually need less folic acid to get the recommended dose. For example, 240 microgram of folic acid is actually equivalent to 400 microgram of naturally bound folate. Then you will be probably thinking, then why should we be taking natural folate? We should be just popping in pills and consuming folic acid supplements. No, that leads to overconsumption. So what is the natural relevant or required doses of folate? Any guesses? It's usually 400 to 600 microgram of daily folate, recommended dose of folate required by an adult. And this requirement increases in pregnancy. Actually, I'm going to talk about pregnancy first before any of the other effects of folate. But before I go there, I'm going to talk about symptoms of folate deficiencies. So just now, I told you that folate is actually, we get folate from different sources in our daily diets as well as folate supplements. But we generally interpret our diet that we are eating a healthy diet. I usually go to a restaurant and take different kinds of salads. I think I'm eating a healthy diet, but I still suffer from health conditions. How does it happen? So sometime in spite of taking good diet, we still suffer from one or other health condition. Since we are talking about folate today, I will highlight some of the general symptoms of folate deficiency. We may be still getting folate deficiency in spite of eating healthy diet. And these are some of the general symptoms like fatigue, mouth sores, gray hair, swollen tongue, poor growth. People develop anemia because of less intake of folate. If you do not consume enough folate in your diet, the blood serum folate levels drop rapidly. And then there are secondary effects like irritable behavior, depression, loss of hair, loss of appetite, poor growth among children. So if you think you're not consuming enough veggies and nutritional supplement, ask your doctor to get your folic acid level checked. But again, the question comes up, how much folate is needed? Since our lifestyle factors, our environmental factors, our genetic composition is different, I think each individual, depending upon their age, the folate requirement is also different. So just to be specific, let me show you some numbers. For example, from birth to 6 months, when a baby still have folate reservoir from the mother. So the folate requirement from outside is very less, 65 microgram DFE. As the child grows, reaches a toddler stage, the folate requirement keeps increasing with the increase in body weight, with the development of organs, with the development with the increase in body weights, with the increase in body composition. And as a person, by the time person reaches adult, the daily requirement of folate increases to 400 microgram DFV. So daily recommendation for an adult by the time the person reaches up to age of 18 years is 400 microgram DFV, and it increases in the case of pregnant women. Now, again, what happens with the daily folate requirement? If the daily folate requirement is not met, why folate is so important? Why folate is gaining so much of attention? Why folate vitamin has been around for such a long time? So in my today's talk, I'm actually going to cover some of the uses of folate in these conditions like cancer, pregnancy, Alzheimer's, heart, and diabetes, one at a time. First, I'm going to talk about pregnancy. We talk about folic acid in the pregnant women comes to our mind. That's the first thing that pops into your mind. The requirement for vitamin B, for the B9 folic acid doubles during pregnancy. It doubles up to like 800 micrograms, somewhere between 600 to 800 microgram per day is an acceptable recommended dose for folate. Normally, folate is required for the baby's growth. Baby's growth reaches up to maximum level in the last trimester of pregnancy due to rapid growth of the fetus cell. It is also essential for red blood cells production and expansion of maternal blood volume, because that's what is happening. Now, deficiency of folic acid during pregnancy is actually responsible for low birth weight. Literature suggests that the preterm birth is very common in women who do not take folic acid supplement before conception and during pregnancy. It was said that preterm birth is actually inversely proportional to the preterm birth. The women who actually start taking folic acid supplements an year before conception has much less chances of having a preterm birth. Sorry, okay. It also prevents the birth defects called neural tube defects, such as spina bifida. Spina bifida is actually a kind of birth defect in which the spine and the spinal cord does not form properly. So though the link between folate deficiency and neural tube defect has been very old, but several animal experiments, human trials, and different data has supported this evidence for many years. Women who actually take folate has 5 times less chances of having offspring that has any kind of neural tube defects. So you see how this person on the right, this baby on the right, has the spina bifida. His spine and the spinal cord has a malformation. Since I'm a mice person and we work with mice all the time, we have preclinical studies going on all the time on the mice, I think it'll be fair for me to mention a few preclinical studies on mice when it comes to pregnancy. Look at those cute babies. So in one of the mice study, it was seen that the fetus, the babies coming from the parents who were given folate supplemented diet had much more higher fetal weight as compared to the babies coming from the parents who were given folate deficient diet. So this FD that you see is folate deficient, and this FS that you see is folate supplemented. So babies coming from the folate supplemented parents had much higher fetal weight. So surprisingly, during my research, I found that animal studies show that not only maternal, but paternal folate deficiency also increases the birth defects in offspring. This was a very interesting study, and stay with me for a moment. Ignore the complex diagrams. Stay with me for a moment. I'm going to explain you that not only moms, but dad's folate intake also determines the health of the fetus. So see, look at this fetus on your left. This is coming from a dad who was given folate supplemented diet. He's completely well-formed, no problem. Whereas the other 4 fetus coming from the dads who were given folate deficient diet had one or other kind of malformation. For example, This mice had a malformation on the craniofacial area. This had a limb hyperextension. There was some problem in the spine, and this has a dorsal malformation. The other two figures also indicates the same thing. You see, this is a muscular brain bone formation, and this bone formation, there was an imbalance formation of bone in the babies coming from dads who were given folate deficient diet as compared to dads who were given folate supplemented diet. So long story short, it's not only mom's folate intake that determines the baby's good health, it's also dad's. This actually kind of clears a myth that only women who's trying to conceive should take folate supplement and not dads. Besides neural tube defects, the importance of folate consumption in brain development of fetus cannot be emphasized enough. It is evident from this graph that you see this first line. This is a typical development that happens before pregnancy and during the 9 months of pregnancy. So women who were actually taking folic acid on the recommended dose had a normal brain development of the baby, as compared to women whose normal intake or daily intake was below the recommended dose. Their kids either had autistic spectrum disorder or had some kind of developmental delay during the pregnancy. So, long story short, folic acid is your pregnancy vitamin. Don't shy away from that. So besides neural tube defects, Okay, now transitioning to use of folate in diabetes. So after pregnancy, I'm going to talk about diabetes. Diabetes cases are increasing at an alarming rate. I saw that by 2040, more than 600 cases of diabetes will be reported, which is really alarming. Now, how folate came in picture for diabetes? Folate came in picture for diabetes because folate, along with vitamin B12, is highly regulating the levels of homocysteine. What is homocysteine now? Homocysteine is an amino acid in the body whose raised level is seen in many adverse health conditions like diabetes, also even in heart conditions. People with the cardiovascular, with a bad cardiovascular condition have a high level of homocysteine. So you can see it as like a biomarker of adverse health condition. Some scientific studies have even proved that there's an inverse relationship between the folate intake and diabetes risk. So if you are more prone to diabetes in your family, taking folate may be a better thing for you. So supplementing with folic acid has been associated actually with the improved blood sugar and reduced insulin resistance. Mechanistically, folate is actually lowering the levels of homocysteine, and hence it reduces the insulin resistance and reduces the risk of type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes also brings certain complications with it. Some previous clinical trials, they showed that folate actually lowers the level of bound sugar in the bloodstream. So whenever you are going for a blood test, the doctor always tests how much sugar you have in your blood. So it actually helps you to lowers the bounded sugar in the blood levels. Now, a lot of diabetic patients we know take metformin. Metformin does the same thing. Metformin increases the plasma homocysteine level. So if a person is taking metformin and takes folate on side as a supplement, the doctor suggests, or the clinicians have been suggesting that the rise in homocysteine level is not as much if metformin is taken alone. So definitely the benefit is much more clear. Now coming to the third part. So after diabetes and pregnancy, I'm going to talk about the role of folate in mental health. Mental health, especially in time of COVID, yes. People with depression have been shown to have lower blood levels of folate than people without depression. A systematic review demonstrated that people, when actually took folate along with the antidepressant medication, the effect, the reduction in the depressive symptoms was much more higher if the person has taken the antidepressant medication treatment alone, which was great. I want to actually kind of, talk in the form of a flow diagram here. The reduced dietary intake of folate actually reduces the serum level of folate, which increases the homocysteine level. And homocysteine, I'm going to repeatedly say during my talk, is a culprit here. Increases DNA damage in the body, increase oxidative stress, messes up the whole body metabolism, and leads to cognitive decline and impairment. Surprisingly, I came across several papers, several articles that talk about human trials. Human trials, they show that low folate status increases the cognitive decline and dementia in older patients much faster. So the human studies have repeatedly emphasized the same results. The human trials have been still going on, that if folate is given to patients who are already on a path of cognitive decline, the rate of cognitive decline lowers. I'm not going to get in details, but there has been a recent study that was published in 2019 from several centers across the world that mild cognitive impairment, like the people who have just started to develop Alzheimer's, if they were given folic acid supplementation for 2 years, it slows down their Alzheimer's progression. So folate or no folate, the Alzheimer's disease, that is responsible for slowing down of the Alzheimer's in the patients who just had an onset. So we can conclusively say that folate metabolism plays a crucial role in the brain. So far we covered the folate benefits in pregnancy, diabetes, and mental health. But folate has also been studied very closely for cardiovascular functions. Having elevated levels of amino acid homocysteine is associated with increased risk of developing heart disease. How? Actually, what happens is homocysteine damages the inner wall of arteries. Folate and vitamin B12 play a key role in converting homocysteine into another compound called methionine. Methionine is one of the building blocks from which body builds new proteins. Now, without enough folate in the body, this conversion process is either inefficient or homocysteine level increases. And as homocysteine level increases, the artery started getting clogged. So it'll be safe to say that folic acid supplement improve the blood flow and cardiovascular functions. I was surprised when I came across the fact that stroke rates in US and Canada before and after mandatory folic acid fortification. So after mandatory folic acid fortification of the foods like cereals and breads, it's reported that stroke death rates reduced many times. So the people who are actually taking folic acid supplements or consuming enough natural folate, and even after fortification of the food, the stroke rates reduced many times in US and Canada. Whereas in UK, actually, they also gave an example of UK. UK is one country where mandatory fortification of food is not required. Such thing never happened. So there was overall reduction of 10% in stroke risk, so which is a good amount. Okay, coming to folate and cancer. Role of folate in cancer. Besides pregnancy, cancer is one of the major health conditions which is affected by folate levels in the body. Mechanistic evidence provides support for an inverse association between folate intake and cancer risk. So what happens if there is a less of folate? What does less of folate or folate deficiency does for the cancer? So what happens is when there is the folate deficiency in the body, there is kind of a mischanging of certain bases, nucleobases in the nucleic acid. As a result, there is more chances of DNA damage or your genetic material undergoing certain repairs. Or maybe I want to say that folate deficiency has a role in DNA methylation. What happens in DNA methylation? Your DNA gets methylated. With DNA getting methylated, Sorry, I'm just taking this on my phone. Okay. So methylation actually can change the activity of DNA segment without changing any sequence. So any undue damage that occurs to DNA may be heritable and bring genetic changes. So to ensure that the incidence of neural tube defects actually reduce, we know that the mandatory fortification has happened in the US, I think since I want to say probably 1998. Yeah. So, but that fortification actually raised the basal level of folic acid consumption by the people a lot. Mandatory fortification of wheat flour enriched aimed at reducing the neural tube defects. But as I just said, it actually raised questions of what's going to happen with cancer. Though folate is important for cancer, but what's going to happen with the overconsumption of folate? Yes, the mandatory fortification has been effective since 1998. There are many more countries where mandatory fortification is not required. But what happened, and there has been studies since last 2 decades, that actually mandatory fortification increased the folate consumption or daily folate consumption many folds. For example, in USA, 140 microgram per 100 gram of product is added to the fortified food. And in some countries, it is even much more. So 35% of US adults even take further supplements. So they're getting fortified food, they're getting natural folate, and above that, they're also taking folate supplements. So they're getting folate from 3 different sources. So as a result, the average total folate intake of 813 microgram per day is being consumed by men, and for women it is 724 microgram per day. So, which is way beyond, almost double in case of for men, for normal men and normal women. So, actually, that reminds me of clinical levels of folate. What do you think? What clinical levels of folate we should be expecting when we go to a doctor? What clinical levels, what folate levels in our blood we should be expecting? Actually, in adults, it should be between 140 to 600 nanograms per milliliter. For children, it is relatively low. It's around 160 to 180. Not only blood, we can also get our urine test too, and in the presence of certain compounds in urine also assess your folate status. So you can see that depending upon how much folate is being consumed in our daily diets, along with supplements, we are kind of over consuming folate. So what is going on? The daily dose of internet, yeah. Unlike USA, Norway does not fortify the flour and grain food. So scientists think the Norwegians may be actually a better model to study the impact of folic acid supplementation on cancer risk. They came up with this graph that folate status, if it is deficient, the cancer risk is kind of reducing. With higher intake of folate or with excess folate intake, what happens? The cancer risk starts increasing. A 10-year follow-up study of this trial showed that people who receive folic acid supplementation actually had significantly increased risk of prostate cancer. I was surprised. So what happens is, because of these reasons, the role of folate in cancer development and progression has kind of remained highly controversial. But the only possible mechanistic explanation that I can think of right now is that folic acid supplementation may not be promoting any new cancer, but it definitely is promoting the progression of any undiagnosed or any pre-existing neoplastic lesions that is present. So the role of folate in cancer is still a little bit controversial. I don't know, it's a friend or it's a foe. So the figure actually is trying to explain you that folic acid supplementation may prevent the initiation of any cancer or any early promotion of cancer, but it can definitely promote the progression of already established precancerous and cancer cells. Alarmingly, a few folic acid chemoprevention trials have been going on, and they say that human beings who are already who already have a precondition for cancer should not take folic acid. And the fact has also been illustrated even with the animal models. They suggest that folate may possess a dual effect, like, a dual face person, just like that. The folate has a dual face. Folate may possess dual modulatory effect on cancer. Doctors do not recommend folate, definitely. There are actually anti-folate drugs in the market like methotrexate and other anti-folate drugs that are used in treating cancer because they are trying to target the folate pathway. So why only cancer actually? Why only cancer? Actually, overconsumption of folate fastens up many other things, fastens up many other adverse effects in the body. We just talked about how folate is important in Alzheimer's disease, how folate slows down the development of Alzheimer's disease. But what does overconsumption do? Do you ever realize the overconsumption actually fastens up the cognitive decline? People experiencing symptoms like weakness, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, shortness of breath may benefit for getting their B12 levels checked in, because scientists believe that higher intake of folic acid actually masks the vitamin B12 deficiency. Vitamin B9 and B12 works as friends hand in hand. So sometimes we think that we have a folic acid deficiency, we should be consuming a lot of folate, but actually that is masking your vitamin B12 deficiency, which brings the person so prone to nerve damage. So that means that maybe it's not vitamin folate, but it's maybe vitamin B12 that's regulating the cognitive decline. Excessive folate intake may speed up the age-related mental decline, particularly in people with low vitamin B12. There was a study when the study showed that healthy people over age of 60, if they have high folate levels, that can be linked to mental decline with a low vitamin B12. But people with a normal B12 levels and low folate levels, that wasn't the case. So we can say that the homocysteine levels, that is not only being regulated by folate, but also highly regulated by vitamin B12. And homocysteine levels, they reaches a plateau and do not decrease after a certain point with additional folate intake. Okay. Now coming to a new F word, and it's diabetic connection. We just talked about this a while back, that how folate is regulating the diabetes, type 2 diabetes. There's another kind of diabetes that's called type 1 diabetes. One person should not be getting more than 400 to 600 micrograms of folic acid a day, unless your doctor prescribes you other way around. There has been studies that shows that the risk of folate, the risk of diabetes increases in the patients where high amount of folate was found. And now how that happens actually. Folic acid is readily available along with the vitamins. So addition may not be necessary. If you are over-consuming, I want to use the word over-consuming. If you're over-consuming the folic acid, you may actually be disturbing your immune system. What happens in case of immune system, folate pathway is instrumental in production and like fueling the immune response. Overconsumption of folic acid actually leads to inefficient effector cells, or I want to say inefficient or natural killer cells that fight against the infection in our body. And that actually leaves the body more vulnerable in face of any attacks, outside attack, virus attack, or bacterial attack. So that's why there has been study that says that folic acid reduces the efficiency of natural killer cells, and that can result in onset of autoimmune conditions like type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes actually occurs because of the messed up immune response of the body. So definitely right now, the role of folate in diabetes is a little controversial. The effect has been different on type 2 and type 1 diabetes, but definitely it is safe to say that overconsumption of folate leaves body more vulnerable. So now what do we do if we have, so what do? And we do not want to overconsume folate. Every time we go to a doctor, we do not ask for folic acid test. So scientists have been coming up with a different ideas, how we can make folate, how can we reduce the folic acid overconsumption, and at the same time, we can make it readily available in the body. So what happens when you consume this folic acid, it undergoes through various pathways before it actually is available in the active form. So 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate is an active form of folate, which is being used in the body in formation of DNA, in RNA, and many other biological processes. So this active form of folate that is being used in the body, it undergoes through various enzymatic reactions. And what happens is, during these enzymatic reactions, some of the enzymes can have some kind of genetic polymorphism, or we can say that the enzyme may be messed up and may not have an appropriate activity. Actually, it was found that 50% of people of European descent have a genetic variation that reduces the activity of enzyme that is responsible for this conversion. If that happens, what are we going to do? How do we make sure that whatever folic acid we are consuming is actually reaching into an active form and it is being absorbable by the body? So not so hard, actually. So what happened? Now people have started promoting, the scientists have started promoting the use of L-methyl folate, which is a more readily form of folate. Supplementation with 5-methyl folate bypasses any kind of enzyme defects that we have and provides the body with the right molecule, with the right amount of time, in the right molecule, in the right amount. So long story short, lower dose of L-methyl folate is possible, and it is really available. And actually, I found this bottle on Amazon. It is available on Amazon and many other websites where the methyl folate can be directly used instead of using folic acid supplements. Okay, so I know science is a little confusing. First, I talked about how folate is so helpful in diabetes, cancer, pregnancy, heart health. And then I started telling you about the bad, side effects of overconsumption of folate. Like what's going to happen if we're going to consume more of folate, or even we don't know that we are overconsuming folate. Half of the population that is popping in folic acid pills every night, they think that they are doing good to their body, but that may not be the case. And then I started telling you, hey, you know what? There is a way to get around this. We can take 5-methyl folate instead of taking folic acid supplements. So science and its results is definitely confusing. Science study outcomes are as good and as profound as its cohort and controls. Our studies, our scientist interpretation is based on clinical trials, on the mice studies, and certain epidemiological data. But I can definitely tell you that, a dish is as good as its cook. So we have to make a good dish with each component, with each ingredient in the right amount. So definitely before I wind up today's talk, I can give you certain take home away message that overconsumption of folate is definitely out of question. But folate is needed in pregnancy. Folate, along with vitamin B12, is helpful in normal brain development. Relationship between diabetic and folic acid is still controversial. We saw that there were several studies that were pro-folate and some which are anti-folate, but definitely overconsumption is out of question. Folic acid intervention reduces the stroke risk in heart patients, and this is a well-confirmed fact. folate consumption in cancer development varies depending upon the genetic variability and the type of cancer. Some of the cancers, like colon cancer and other digestive bowel cancer, it can lead, the higher consumption of folate can increase the risk. So now what to do? What is how we can actually make sure that we are consuming the right amount of folate. So when you go to your doctor for your annual checkup, the first thing you step is to ask your physician to talk to your physician about your diets, your doubts that you think that you may not be consuming enough folate, and to check your folate levels. So ask for a blood test to determine the folate status, and also to check for MTHFR mutation. What is this MTHFR mutation? So this is an enzyme that was responsible for the production of methylfolate, the most absorbable active form of folate in the body. So a lot of people are actually has MTHFR mutation, and they never know whole life. So it is very important that if you have any kind of symptoms, to get your blood folate level checked, and also get yourself checked for the mutation of MTHFR. So I can say that overall supplementation of folate has benefits and may prevent several health conditions and diseases. So as every scientist say, and I will say the same thing, the science is still out there, and there are a number of ongoing trials. We have the answer there, and we are still looking for it. So with that, I'm going to wind up my talk. But before I wind up my talk, it's very important that I have acknowledgements for my lab, my great mentor, Professor Sergey Karpanko and Natalia Karpanko, and my present and past lab members. And this is how we look these days in pandemic. Really cute, right? And just to remind you that we scientists also do some fun things outside the lab, like the pumpkin carving contest. We did this pumpkin carving in the fall and won first prize, actually. So thank you very much for being kind audience, patient audience. Hope today's talk was helpful. Thank you.
Awesome, and thank you, Dr. Sharma. It was really interesting to learn more about folate and how it can impact so many aspects of our lives. I do not currently see any questions in the Q&A, but we do have a question in the chat. So a question that came up is there a particular form of supplement that is favored over others?
Yes, Susan. So as I was showing you that methylfolate, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, the methylfolate is considered to be more readily form of folate. So people and scientists and even nutritionists are bending more towards consumption of methylfolate, because with that you consume less dose and more like uses, daily doses, and more use and more like available folate to the body. For example, if you think like we should be consuming natural folate because that's the best folate, but that's not really bioactive. You cook your spinach, and one fourth of the folate is already gone. So you think, hey, you know, a bunch of spinach has probably like 200 micrograms of folate, but once you cook it, 1/4 is already gone, and then you consume in form of folic acid, which actually is not the readily usable form in the body. So definitely, if you have to choose over folic acid supplement and methylfolate, I would pick methylfolate supplements.
Awesome.
Great, thanks.
Let's see, I'm gonna give it a second just to see if any other questions come in. We had a great comment from Dr. Stewart. Excellent talk, Jaspreet. I could not agree with her more.
Thank you.
All right, well, I just Want to take a second to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate you taking the time to support Appetite for Life, to support Dr. Sharma and this excellent presentation. And a reminder, number one, that this has been recorded, so it will be available in the coming days if you'd like to revisit it or share it with any of your colleagues. And then we will be returning next month. So for the month of March, we are excited to be welcoming Dr. Natalia Kropenko to speak with us. So we will have another wonderful presentation, and more details on that will follow in our regular emails. So we hope to see you again next month as well. Thank you all, and get out there and hopefully enjoy some of this beautiful, beautiful Wednesday afternoon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.